So what I want to do is we'll do introductions as we go down the line here, but other than me just listing out your name, mispronouncing it, and then doing your title, I wanted you to talk to me about the stuff that you've done over the career here. I think we've got collectively 100 years plus of software experience here, but it's a very diverse background. We've got people who worked in government, people who worked as consultants, people who worked in products and retail online, lots of different stuff. So I'll just do myself. I'm Scott Hanselman. I work remotely for Microsoft in a tiny town west of here. I worked for Microsoft for 13 years. I worked for Step Technology, Chrome Data, Carillion over the last 27, 28 years here. So I've done retail online, banking online, all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I'm super old. Niamh, your last name is Cahill?
My last name is Cahill, so just think Niamh rhymes with Steve when you're looking at my name after the fact. My name is Niamh Cahill. I am the Solutions Architect Director for the West Territory for Chef. In that role, I get to talk to tons of different companies and see what they're doing. So I really enjoy my job from that perspective. And I always like to be pragmatic when I'm talking to our customers and folks out in the field about what they're trying to achieve. And in my career, I've worked on so many different projects. Gosh, I started life on Wall Street as a network engineer, troubleshooting applications on trading floors on Wall Street, and that was quite the baptism of fire. And from there, I became a management consultant, focusing on ITIL at the time, but more specifically monitoring and capacity management. So I did projects at Pfizer around drug development pipelines, and then I worked at AIG for a number of years on the monitoring team there. And then I went to work for CA Technologies, where I was sales engineering, specializing in network performance, actually. So I got to see a lot of stuff there, how you look at monitoring from essentially the network perspective and application performance in that area. Super happy to be here today.
Cool. Brian.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Brewer. I have been in IT since roughly '99, so I'm also one of the old guys here. I've worked in a variety of different fields, so I've done IP encryption, I've done video streaming, that type of stuff. Worked in banking, mobile banking for quite a bit. I came into the field from outside of IT. I used to be a music major, actually. I just kind of fell into it. And I actually really enjoyed programming, software quality assurance, and as a matter of course over time, just kind of moved away up the ranks and started helping other people do the same thing. So most recently, I'm at Nike. I've been there for 3 years, just arrived back to New Zealand, which is probably how I got on the panel, because I kind of know some people who know some people who know these as RayGun. Yeah, most recently I'm working with SAP automation, trying to inject a little bit of usage of Git and other things in SAP development, which is kind of a weird challenge to be part of. So currently I'm working with cloud technologies, helping automate delivery systems, writing some tooling, back to that, and then providing my role as an SDEV for the team I'm on.
I worked at Nike.
Yeah.
1997.
Excellent.
Yeah, I worked in the order management application for Java.
Still there.
Yeah, the application hasn't changed. 22 years.
Wow.
There you go. Kathy.
I used to be a music major too.
Yay! Very cool.
So I'm Kathy Lee. I work at Microsoft.
Microsoft.
What's
your stop?
It didn't work out for me. Microsoft with Scott, and actually, funny story, Scott and I have been sort of circling around each other for many, many, many years now. I've been doing this writing software since 2000. You met for the first time, I think, in 2000.
Yeah.
Working for the same company-ish. Well, I was an employee, you were staff on.
Yeah.
And then years later, I got him a job at Step Technology, at Carillion.
Yeah.
Well, I was selling him my car at the credit union. Remember that?
Oh my God, you were?
Yeah, I was selling you my car, my Prius. It was the Prius.
The green one?
Yeah, the green one.
I bought your green Prius?
Yeah, that was my Prius. That was my Prius.
Good car.
Yeah.
My parents had that car now.
Yeah, but
Nice.
it was a 2001 Prius. I was one of the only people who was actually selling one because they were so brand new. And we're at the credit union, and Scott's like, "Hey, how are things at Carillion?" And I was like, "Why is this guy asking me for a job?"
I don't
Anyway,
remember any of this.
Yeah, I have a really good memory. And then cut to 2018, and then Scott got me the job at Microsoft. So yeah, we've been circling around each other for 2 decades now.
Yeah, pretty odd.
Yep, exactly right. So I work for Microsoft in an organization called Commercial Software Engineering, and we're an org that sort of straddles product and like customer accounts kind of stuff. So whenever we hear of a customer who is trying to adopt the Azure stack, but they're not really quite sure of how to implement it or attack it, my team will sort of come in and we'll do what we call a code with engagement, where we'll sit with the company software developers, we'll write the software with them using best engineering fundamentals and practices, and then at the end of the engagement, then the idea is that we leave them with as little technical debt as possible, and we just peace out, and we never talk to them again until their next engagement, which could be related or unrelated. But for that particular software piece, we don't come back.
So for killing technical debt, I want this card before I leave.
Well, so before I worked for Microsoft, I was working for Bonneville Power, which is a federal agency in town. I'm sure everyone knows it. And we had so much technical debt, I felt like I was never going to crawl out of it. So, yeah, that's pretty good.
So feel good about your power grid.
Yes. I feel very good about it.
So I'm Dave Harrison. I'm based out of Central Oregon, a little town called Madras, kind of on the way to Bend. I work for Microsoft Premier, so we do a lot of consulting on helping people kind of amp up their DevOps efforts. I didn't know what DevOps was 6 years ago. A couple years before that, I was working at Columbia Sportswear, and I thought Agile was like, this is a great new thing. It made my life a lot better as a manager. I knew what my team was doing, and I was aware of blockers, but it made my relationships with other teams worse. And so I was trying to figure out what was going on. And so a couple years later, I figured out this whole movement called DevOps, which is very big, and there's no manifesto. And ended up writing a book on it. Came out about 6 months ago on Amazon called Achieving DevOps. I love the movement as a whole. I think we're going great places, and I do think monitoring is the secret sauce.
My name is Jon Edwards. I've been an ops guy for about 20 plus years, and I'm saying 20 plus because I don't want to say 30. I moved to Portland about 3 years ago, following a dream, and that dream was my wife. I work for Standard Insurance. A really big focus of what we have is getting our monolithic apps to be more current. My team is the steward of infrastructure that is old enough to vote, and maybe actually older than some people in this room. Had a really good, enjoyable career that's bounced me various places. Started at Microsoft, went to Gates Foundation, worked in the power industry, worked for a construction company, of all things, serving as kind of a technology architect, and then ultimately came here. And so for me, being at Standard is really kind of a cool thing right now, because we have all this old archaic stuff. And every year it's the annual, we're going to get off mainframe this year. We're going to get off mainframe this year. And we've only been saying that like 10 years from what I hear. But there's a huge groundswell to embrace microservices, to embrace cloud technology, or putting technology in the cloud. But what does that mean? And for us, because we're an insurance company, right? We don't think that way. There's a seismic shift in forcing us to think different, to look at things differently, and ask ourselves, what the hell does that mean? And as part of that, to layer on traditional IT, I think some of you have probably felt this pain, traditional IT and the business units don't necessarily talk all the time. Right? We're not always in strict concert in what the customers need. And this is really forcing us to re-look at how do we really add value? What value are we providing, not just to the business, but to our customers? And do we really understand what the customer experience means? So we're really kind of in the infancy of that journey, but it's a cool journey. And I suspect some of you are across the spectrum on that. It'll be interesting to just kind of hear how the dialogue goes.
Can we take a moment to honor John's shoes?
What about me? That's true.
Yes. Also in the
Yes.
Where can I get it there?
I can get you the artist's name and email address after this meeting.
Is it custom shoes?
They're custom painted. They are a pair of Jordan 1s that I had painted with the Rick and Morty.
Wow.
like you did, like one does.
Yes.
And then you'll get us into the Nike store.
There you go.
Not everybody.
Half the battle.
So a couple of things that I'm interested in here. I am starting to get, like you said, you didn't want to say 30 years, right? I'm butting up against 30 years in software, and that's starting to concern me a little bit because I'm becoming an old person who shakes fist at cloud. And that is a little bit concerning because I used to be really known for like innovative thinking, and now I'm just known for like saying, well, we were doing that 15 years ago. You said that you learned about DevOps 10 years ago. You mentioned Agile. You also talked about mainframes. I'm kind of getting, what's the word? I'm just starting to get negative and like jaded towards all of these things because if it wasn't DevOps or Agile, it was XP, extreme programming. It was object databases. I mean, I was whiteboarding for money at Nike in the mid-90s, teaching them about object-oriented programming. I was going to change everything, and it was object databases, and then it was XML and REST and da-da-da-da-da. Like, aren't we just kind of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic?
Cloud? Or
With cloud, that's just other
All
people's
of these
computers.
things are about delivering value faster with less waste. It's all the same thing, different labels.
Yeah.
Say that again. He said it's delivering value.
Value faster with less waste.
So you do feel things have changed. You don't think we're just naming things differently. Because
The cloud is
DevOps,
definitely engaging.
DevOps is just a name, though. Doesn't you feel like DevOps is just a fancy name of stuff that's good practices?
I would say just the automation opportunities themselves, which we didn't have 20 years ago.
Why? We were doing cruisecontrol.net at Step 15, 20 years ago.
I'm deploying whole SAP systems in 2 hours.
You did what?
Putting out whole SAP systems.
And that was unheard of before.
Yeah.
You gotta give us,
it used to
you
take
gotta give
like
us
2,
context.
3, 4 weeks.
Okay, so that's interesting. Something that used to take a month now takes 2 hours.
Yeah.
And what happened fundamentally? Was it organizational willpower, or was it a piece of technology that made that possible?
A lot of it, well, it goes both ways. But a lot of it's API and availability and just technology getting out of the way. But at least for me, that's my experience on it.
Probably just a different perspective from where I sit is, yeah, the technology has changed. It has made efficiency easier. But I think there's a fundamental shift in tech with regard to business. So like back when we started, IT was a necessary evil, right? People was like, shit, I got to talk to the IT guys.
I still do.
Shoot darn. Children, you're adults, you're fine. As we evolved, IT becomes a service provider. And the business says, okay, I want my value per dollar, and if you can't provide it, we're going to go elsewhere. And I think with this new iteration of, I don't want to call it a shiny rock, but it'll be DevOps today, it'll be something else tomorrow, right? It's always iterating, it's always changing. But what we're seeing is that people are kicking dirt over the line between IT and business. And we're not service providers, we are business partners. We are equals. We are providing value overall to give the customer something that is compelling. We want our customers happy. We take pride in that. And it's getting away from kind of the traditional roles and just saying, we're all kind of blended now, right? We're all in this together. And in the insurance world, at least what I've seen, and it's been very consistent with energy and everywhere else. I mean, Microsoft was the exception. Microsoft's just weird. It was very much people talking across each other, not really talking to each other and saying, are we really chasing the same thing? And kind of with kind of the DevOps and scaled Agile, kind of just the approaches and the changes and really engaging differently, at least from where I sit, I see that we're getting better because that line is getting kicked over. It's not really a siloed function. We're all in it together.
I don't understand that metaphor, dirt kicking over a line.
Right, so if you've got a line that separates pieces of a field, if you kick over the dirt, you don't know where the boundary is. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is this should be boundaryless.
Okay, but I heard from Brian that technology is making some of the things that he's doing possibly, and the things that you were saying were more organizational willpower and how people were talking to themselves. And Niamh, you were making motions like you had to.
Oh, well, I just think that, what's happened over the last few years, to your point, John, is essentially technology has become the brand, right? So if you think about how folks are experiencing Target.com or the Standard or how they're interacting with companies, what I noticed was on the Apple App Store, the mobile App Store, folks were leaving reviews, but they weren't in relation to the mobile app. Well, some of them were, but they were basically saying Target sucks and this is why, right?
Yeah.
And it was really much more about the brand itself. And what you've had is this collapse where nearly every company is a technology company now. So I think that's what's really driving a lot of this collapse in boundaries between IT, which was the boring IT team, and now everybody really has to have this like outward-facing brand that's technology-driven. And it needs to align with all the other ways that you interact with your customers. So a lot of folks now are tracking if you come into a physical branch of a bank, for example, and then you interact with that same bank online, they know who you are, they know what they're starting to track customer experience. And at the end of the day, that's what monitoring's all about, right? It's about the experience of your customer, whether those customers are internal, which is often the case, right? So we need to enable teams and make them happy internally, or external customers, right?
One of the things that earlier today, one of our sites went down for about 15 minutes, and it was a hiccup. It was a little medium-sized site that went down for 15 minutes, and people lost their minds. And I'm realizing that like 15, 20 years ago, Columbia Sportswear goes down for 15, 20 minutes. People are like, oh, they're an outdoors company. It's it's not their thing, so it's okay for them to go down. People today have zero patience for your site going down. It's like calling a phone number, getting a busy signal. Just
They have more tools to express that dissatisfaction.
Right. Exactly.
So Nike has an app called Sneakers that people use to shop for limited run shoes. If it's down, Twitter is filled with people saying, Nike's the devil, burn, burn. It's like, it might have been 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's the kind of energy you're seeing
But
online.
if you read it, you'll see it's not hyperbole. People are
Did you know that in the early days of GitHub that their primary monitoring system was Twitter? And they would actually learn that GitHub was down because people would tweet about it?
not surprised.
Verizon actually has a whole Twitter team that is chartered with tracking customer sentiment.
Really?
Yeah.
There was many times I would come in on a Monday and I find out from my customers the service was down all weekend. And huge gap in monitoring.
Really?
Very embarrassing.
Okay, so we
But that
have
was 8 years ago.
yeah.
There
we have
wasn't a lot of
zero-
excuse for it then. There's zero excuse nowadays.
Okay, so that you're saying that we now have this is a utility. We realize the internet is a utility, but our sites, regardless of the business acumen, whether it's an insurance company or a power company or whatever, a sneaker company, the website must never be down, ever. And if it does, you gotta be able to tell someone about it in a way where you don't get informed by the person the first day you walk in on Monday morning. Hey, the site was down all weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's even beyond up down. I mean, they might be having a poor experience, performance, right? Latency, lag. From my standpoint, we care about uptime. We care about these things, but where, at least within my space, where I see significant gaps that we have to close and are in the process of closing is, what is that end-to-end user experience? And there are tools today that do that. Before, you were manually creating an account or logging in, or oftentimes you just didn't do that, right? If the service is up, it's fine.
That actually brings up a good point about, I used to work for a mobile banking site, and Brilliant was the backend for that. So we are basically providing banking services over your phone, and everybody expects those things to work all the time, 100%. So your money is moving around. And one of the things I noticed in the management side is a lot of people didn't necessarily understand what that really meant. And so we had things like uptime and everything else, response times, averages, that's what they track. And meanwhile, an average across 20 million transactions a minute or something, which we were getting stupid numbers like that, you've got this long tail. And this long tail actually is most of the people that are feedbacking on Twitter and doing other things like that. So I think having management kind of reset their expectations to, you can't catch everybody, but 95% of your customers should be having the best optimal expectations and experiences.
So Kathy, when you're in commercial software engineering, you're sitting with customers and a very kind of diverse group of customers, right? Like you handle a certain group, are you only government or all kinds of customers, all flavors?
So I just moved from the government team to the media and communications team.
Media and communications.
So yeah, I'm doing a big engagement right now with Warner Brothers.
Ooh,
Right
I hope
now.
you get free stuff.
Maybe.
So my question is, what level of maturity are you seeing? It's the last month of the decade. Enjoy that. And we are still going into places and finding levels of sophistication around source control that are minimal.
Yeah.
We're here talking about whether or not monitoring is. Like, think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of software.
Yeah. So it really depends. There are some times when you walk in. Like I always say that I've been with Microsoft for just over a year now, and I've been on multiple customer sites. And what I always tell people is like, you just never know what's going to happen when you walk through that door.
Yeah.
Like you just never know. And of course, we all work for like pretty big customers. Like even within that company, different teams are going to have different levels of maturity. But I went to an engagement once where they were like, teach us .NET. Like we don't know how to write like C# code, and we're not sure like what code repository we're going to use, and very 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 immature. Up to like Warner is actually pretty sophisticated, but they're moving. I don't know whether you all know this, but they were recently acquired by AT&T. And AT&T just signed a big deal with Microsoft, so they're moving all of their companies to the Azure cloud, and Warner Brothers is almost all AWS. So we're sort of moving in that direction. But so they're pretty sophisticated in their AWS workloads, but totally nascent in Azure. So we're sort of educating them on that realm, but their fundamentals are all there.
Mm-hmm.
So Kathy, how are they comparing before and after customer experience from AWS into Azure? Do they have an approach around that, or is that something they're considering? From a monitoring perspective, if you have an app in AWS and then you move it to Azure, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm to be honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, for me, in terms of like monitoring, like because I'm more on the front end of the customer experience, like I don't know what happens after the fact, right? So.
I could add to that. Like we're actually balancing multiple clouds, mostly for pricing. So as you probably know. So one of the things that we do, we just treat these assets as what they are. They're cattle, and we dump everything in Splunk. And so ultimately, build scripts are different, but a lot of the actual expectations from the customer side, they just have not the address, and they're happy. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of the customers I work with, I'd say half or so are in the starvation state where there's no monitoring at all. So they're driving around without any seatbelt, it means nothing. Or they've got so much data and their dashboards are so rich and all this information that everybody ignores it. So it's like there's two models. There's starvation, obesity. And I kind of wish we could be a lot smarter in how we're tuning our alerts and making that information visible.
Okay, so let's think about this for a second. I've gone to customers where source control is zip files, v1.zip, v2.zip. I've gone to customers where it's been source safe, which lives on, right? Where it's a centralized exclusive checkout, CVS, SVN, Git, and even in Git, people can use it like it's source safe. In the monitoring world, I think we understand levels of sophistication around source control. Like I think that's something we can all agree on, those definitions. In the monitoring world, the audience, how would they determine what level of sophistication they are monitoring? Like, well, I have a Pingdom account, what else do I need? Right, that's a level of sophistication. Like I get a text with a site's down, what else do I want?
Well, I think it's about really getting actionable data, right? So you can have a lot of data and you can be drowning in detail and not know where to even start. Or you can have no data. So it's about starting with the end in mind. And in terms of levels of sophistication, I think starting with the basic, how do I measure my customer experience, right? So the top-down approach. The other approach is basically from the ground up. So infrastructure, network, cloud environment, and then leveling that together to figure out, okay, so if I find out somebody's having a bad experience or this something's being monitored and it's not performing properly, how do I get to the root cause of that really quickly?
Yeah, I think cluster analysis is a really interesting area. Like you may not even have logged errors of any sort, but your customers are having issues, and maybe they're kind of having the same issues sporadically, but you can start to cluster those things together, analyze them, and then find the root cause.
Yeah, and we talked actually before this about leveraging machine learning and AI models. So if you do have a ton of data, there's a lot of technologies out there at this point that are starting to bring AI and machine learning to bear on that. The problem and the challenge I see with that is you have to have very clear data sets, and you have to have your data in the one location, or like in a location that's accessible. So that too has its challenges and its limitations.
So, Niamh, I want to key in on something that you said that stood out to me. And we talked about monitoring, and there are tools to monitor pretty much everything out there. But what you said was customer experience. And I want to go back to Dave here. Mr. Dave has a website called Driftboat Dave. And I strongly encourage you to check it out because he runs a podcast, and the podcast deals with achieving DevOps. And one of our hosts, Mr. JD Trask over there, brought up, which I thought was a very salient point, what good is monitoring if it doesn't tell us what our customer is going through? Right? I mean, because we can monitor everything. We know transactions, you name it, but how does that relate to the customer experience? If we don't understand that, it doesn't matter what tools we have and how deep we go. It's pointless. So let's spend the time monitoring the things that we actually care about, and those things that we care about are exactly what our customers care about.
Okay, well, how do I uplevel that to the business person's perspective? Because I've got, kind of Hanselman Incorporated. I got my blog and my podcast, and it's all a bunch of microsites. I got about 16 different sites all running in Azure. And I wanted to feel like I was an official startup, so I got like a cheap TV from Costco, and I put a dashboard on it, and I hang it in the living room so I can feel like I'm a real business. Because you're not a real business until you have a flat screen with a map with like pins in it that show where your business is. And right now I got all the charts. I got time to first byte, time spent in JavaScript, but those are all just technical details. But I don't have an index. I don't have the NASDAQ, like 99% of the customer. Like, I haven't defined what customer experience means and drawn a map between here's what the logs turn into these numbers, and then it kind of drops there. I've never really seen anyone that has an index that indicates customer experience, customer happiness.
So who are you talking to? Right? Are you the business owner, or are you just?
I am the business owner.
Okay. Who's your customer?
The set of all people who are not me.
Subset or large
I'm a
set?
customer.
What's your product or service?
Podcast.
Oh, well, you're out of luck. As the person, how are you getting feedback from your customers? Are they leaving notes?
They leave angry tweets and comments.
Okay. So out of those angry tweets and comments, what are they telling
I'm
you?
in India, your website sucks.
Okay.
I'm in Australia, your website sucks. I'm in New Zealand, your website sucks.
Okay.
Then I put in like CDN. Like I'm not learning. I don't know. I don't have any cluster analysis. I don't have any tools to bucket any of this. I have logs, and those logs turn into charts.
So is this one-way feedback, or is it interactive? Well, do you have like a second cousin that's responding to these people, or is it just?
No, you are looking at the sum total
Okay.
of Hanselman Incorporated. Well, my point is though that those situations happen. You might be a 50 or 100 person company, but the ops people are 1 or 2 people, and they're trying to have a relationship with business to make sure that the business gets what it needs. But I'm proposing that there's this gap where they go from text files on disk, and then they break it into microservices, and now you've got 50 text files on disks. And then you've got charts and graphs, and then an uncanny valley, and then to this vague businessy thing, and I'm picking on you a little bit. It's called customers having good experiences. I'm trying to understand how to get across the uncanny valley.
Maybe you've got a couple different problems. One is content. So are they happy about the content? Hopefully they are. I assume they are.
That's an interesting perspective. Like I haven't even thought about like the product, but yeah, let's
That's the
assume that
actual
they
service that
let's
you're
assume they
providing.
love
Yeah.
the product.
You're providing information
Yeah.
that they want to consume, hopefully. And then it's the method by which you're doing that.
Well, I could be having a bad business experience because people who are far away from central U.S., where my main server is, the farther away you get from central U.S., I postulate the worse the customer experience gets because speed of light, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't have proof of that.
Oh, it could also be, does it actually relate to what they care about?
Okay, so how does that apply to monitoring and ops and things like that?
Well, that's where you can separate. If you're taking a lot of feedback, at least this is how I perceive it. If you're taking a lot of feedback, you've got to be able to filter that feedback out to what has to do with the service you're providing,
The
what
contextual
method.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's where I kind of wanted to go with that is you brought up the text files. Don't really care about that.
Okay.
You're getting feedback that's saying outside of the hub, outside of the mothership, performance sucks. So working with your tech people, it's like, hey, we have this problem. We're getting this feedback. help us understand, how are we deployed? How are we configured? What opportunities do we have to potentially expand this? Do we even know what the problem is? But it's having that dialogue and making it, you've got your tech side and your business side, really, again, need to become indistinguishable. We're solving the same problem. We're bringing different skill sets to the table. And that's where I was trying to go.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about shifting left in terms of monitoring, and I think a lot of it is starting with the end in mind. You have to architect with that worldwide performance. If that's your target market, you have to account for the fact that there's going to be somebody up in Alaska who's on 56K bandwidth. I mean, I worked a lot with Wells Fargo, and their complaint was, we can't run our business apps in our branches out of these small locations, and we can't upgrade the network because it's all satellite, so we just have an inherent limitation. But when we go in to look at somebody who is shopping online for curtains, this is a real life use case, and it was tanking the business apps. And it's like, when you talk about architecting and architectural patterns, I think it's about starting with those kinds of use cases in mind. And maybe it's something as simple as like, hey, guess what? If we see you going out to these particular kinds of websites, your traffic is going to be stopped on this side, but
We block those kind of sites.
So, to me, like a lot of people get started doing, they have a cycle down and they can't figure out what happened. We got to get better at this. So they start with doing crash reporting and monitoring. That's like your gateway drug. But Scott, in the case you mentioned, we're almost positive there's like one metric that matters, and that's server response time. Yeah. So that's real user monitoring.
Server response time.
Yeah, so you can do real user monitoring with a global map, and if it takes longer than 1 or 5 seconds, you turn that like Russia with red, for example. And that way you're making a guess at what's important. It already is, but yes. You, in other words, based on response time, you can turn different countries red or green, and you can kind of correlate it with user satisfaction. So you're making a guess, and that metric might change, but you got one number, and that one number can really drive customer satisfaction, is your guess.
Interesting. I hear, though, that there's a movement towards more monitoring on the client to balance out the time to first byte might mean one thing, but what's going on in the client, whether I have too much JavaScript or like the time to the page being responsive or scrollable is as important. Like I found out that I had a bunch of issues with JavaScript running synchronously. You can send all the bytes you want as fast as you want, just still spend a half a second messing around on the client side. But you think that the gateway drug for monitoring is time to first byte, server response time thing, and then go from there.
That's our guess, right?
No,
so we start with that
that's a good guess.
hypothesis, and we see if improving your response time to the client, if it helps make the people, your dissatisfied people in Japan, for example, happier with your projects.
I like what you said. You said the gateway drug is crash monitoring. We all agree on that. Like being
well, instant response in general, right? So
well,
something broke.
Something broke.
Yeah.
Who's that? Yeah.
There's a white noise machine on in
Is that
here
what it is?
for some reason.
I thought it was inside my
the
head.
ocean.
One thing I want to go back to, though, because some of us, and no disrespect, use buzzwords that are become part of our vocabulary. I don't necessarily understand them. So would you help me understand, and maybe the audience gets this, maybe you don't, but shift left, what that means more? When we say shift left, what are we referring to?
So what that means, at least for me and my experience, is
Did y'all know what that is? When people says just shift left, like totally. Half of you are nodding your heads and half are shaking.
okay, so I have lived through the experience of with a new app we need to deploy or new technology, and we're all excited and all the teams are working together, and literally the day before you're like, oh my God, we don't have monitoring instrumented for this. And suddenly there's this last minute scramble of how am I going to make sure that this works well when I roll out and do this change. And I think part of shifting left is doing the monitoring as part of that design phase up front, but also making it as easy as possible for various teams to leverage and access monitoring, making that part of a standard process so that you don't have to shoehorn it in after that.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say that the far left side of the, hey everyone, we're going to write some software, that's the far left. And we're thinking about we need internationalization, we need accessibility, we need monitoring.
Yep.
And if you're on the right, which is the pushing the publish button, and someone says, hey Niamh, before you push publish, what about monitoring? That's a problem.
Yeah.
Shift it to the left. That's what that means.
Correct.
That is good to know.
And security.
And security.
Yeah.
And security. And security.
That's
we,
awesome.
It's always a thing that we bring up with the customer, like a number one when we're engaging with them. Like, have you thought about security? How are you going to do it? What are our strategies?
I have,
I would like-
I have an SSL cert, right? That's fine.
Shifting left on testing, for example, big effort on Microsoft means everyone's involved in testing to some degree, not just the little group.
Okay.
Actually, I just need to add the other side of monitoring. We monitor things that are in production, and that's great. But there's also monitoring before it goes to production and doing performance testing. I think a lot of times people leave that out. But again, you can proactively, let's say, if you knew all your customers were going to be in India, you could set up a test that stimulates clients from India hitting your site, monitoring that before you actually.
Okay, so now I know what shift left means, but now I feel like I'm going to shift everything important left. And I can give you a list of like 15 things that are all left things. And now, but I'm also doing agile. So I'm feeling very waterfally now suddenly because I've got to do everything up front. How do I reconcile some amount of agility and some amount of iteration with what you just described, which is a really intense upward planning, beginning planning phase where I have to do and think about all kinds of things? How do I make that not scrummer fall?
Yeah, maybe it's a good point to mention that you've still got to do that work, regardless of what happens. So it's all about time and how many resources you want to help do that work for you. So when you invite your teams to actually start to take part in that, in the designing and then stepping through all these stages up front, you're actually distributing the amount of work you have to do as a business planner to come up with and that's very effective. That's one of the benefits of agile and shifting left.
And Brian, you mentioned as well automation, right? So day one, we have the whole infrastructure as code approach now, and it should ideally be baked into that. So you're just iterating, right? So agile is all about iterating and incremental improvements, as you're deploying something new. So I think it's baking it into that process as well. So it's not I have to go out and buy a whole new monitoring platform. It's that I need to update something to account for that. And you shrink the task.
Niamh, I love that point because a lot of times we think security with a capital S or monitoring with a capital M, which means it never gets done because it'll take us months. But let's do a minimum viable product. It means to build in monitoring can be a Friday afternoon thing. And then you iterate on it. Same thing with security.
Yeah.
You can take a couple hours, take a stab at it. It's going to be horrible, but it's a start.
That is a really important thing that can't be overexpressed. I joked about Hanselman Incorporated, but I've got a blog and a podcast and all these different sites that I want to run. I got 16 websites, and I've got exactly one person, myself. I have no one else. But I've got a CI/CD pipeline, I've got unit tests, I've got gateways, I've got dev, test, staging. We need to remember that the only thing that is preventing me from doing that level of sophistication of development is organizational willpower and time. Mm-hmm. The tech is not what's keeping me from doing that. I can automate myself out of the job entirely.
And that's technical debt. So you build 4 hours into your sprint where you take an afternoon and you take a stab at it. Don't do 3 days. Don't take a month. Just allocate 4 hours.
Yeah, or every task you do, bake in a little bit of tech that revolution. It always helps.
Yeah, a lot of things that we do is one of the things that we sort of redefine before we do a code with engagement is we sort of say, what is the definition of done for a user story? What's done? What does done mean? When I say I'm done with this, what does that really mean? And a lot of people will say, well, it's working. Well, is that really done? So we'll have things like, are the unit tests up and running? Did you break the build? And did somebody review it for security things? Like, is this an open REST API? Do I need to put some sort of authorization on it? And then what kind of logging is this component doing? And is it doing the right kind of logging? I think a lot of people, me sometimes, will just sort of be like, oh, I need to log this, copy paste, and then you find out later that it's logging the other thing. Oops. Just having someone review your pull request for that kind of content can go a long way. And saying that I before I can call this done, that check, these things are all done, and taking it a little bit at a time, and not just all at once, I think is a good way to go.
So that's a really good point. How many of you guys out here are suffering from the business won't pay for monitoring syndrome? Anybody?
Everyone else, the 3 people raise their hand.
Like,
That
we
means
can't
that everyone
afford
else has
monitoring.
like
We don't have
all
time
this
for
monitoring
monitoring.
money. They got like they're just swimming in monitoring money.
Sure.
You like have all the monitoring.
We would never produce like any car without a dashboard, right? So if you make it part of what Kathy was talking about, your written definition of done at Microsoft, we're going to produce this value and it's attached. It has to have monitoring in production. It's a requirement. So make it part of your definition of done. Don't let the business cheap out on something as important as a safety belt, a dashboard, or monitoring.
Now, one thing that we discovered about 3 years ago, and I really started baking in, like, it's always fun to say, like, oh, I just learned about source control, or I just learned about whatever, and someone's like, oh, I learned about that 20 years ago. Here's the thing, I'll like kind of come out and say, here's the thing I learned about 3 years ago, and you'll tell me whether or not you think it's best practice, or how did you not know this 10 years ago? Health checks with a depth of sophistication. So my sites now have an actual /health check, and they return a JSON file, and that JSON file has all of these sub-dependencies of the site. So my site has an in-memory database, it's got Redis, it's got a REST API, it's a third-party REST API. So when you call /health check, it doesn't just return okay and say, yes, my site is up, which tells you nothing. It goes through and it's basically checklist for your site. And it returns a JSON document by which I can say, oh, well, the third-party API that I rely on is degraded. Therefore, I've increased my cache from 5 minutes to 4 hours so as to not have the site be down. This is the thing I figured out and I learned from reading somewhere 3 years ago. And now I'm a superhero.
2003.
2003. Thank you for that gift. So 16 years ago, 3 years ago.
Neural networks, actually. They did a bloody amazing job.
Yeah, but I mean, the key is you're using it now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still plenty of people out there.
Thank you for your support, John.
Welcome, Brewer.
If only everyone was that supportive.
I mean, we spend a lot of money on tools, and we have implemented some correctly and some not so much.
Sure.
We have a ton of data, but if we're not actioning it, so what?
That one, I just have to say, that one's beautiful in another sense because your clients, the people in India, if you call a few of them, actually reach out to them and give them that URL, you can find out directly from them what their experience is. That's a distributed monitoring system, and that's a really beautiful thing.
So I'm hearing I'm like the last one to do this at this point.
I don't know.
Do you all have in-depth health checks that aren't just pings and like get returned, but it actually has a document, like your site, your top level site returns a document with all of these subsites, their relative health, graded, healthy. Everyone's been doing that but me. No one felt the need to tell me this. Could have used this information yesterday.
Even if you have that data, how many of you are empowered to take action on it?
Yeah, that's the big question.
And that's the bigger challenge. In more kind of the traditional delivery where we're trying to migrate away from, and that tends to be a problem. We have incredible tech people that want to do the right thing, but and this is where I point the finger at myself and anybody else that's tagged as a people manager in an organization. We're the blocker, right? We are not getting out of the way of the people that are trying to do the work, and that tends to be more a problem than we have this data.
Well, actually, there's a valid case for security, protecting yourself as well. Like as soon as you put that kind of technology out, everybody's going to start trying to use it. True. Successfully or not, they're going to try, and that's the key.
To your point, John, I think that when I worked at AIG, we did one thing that I thought was really cool. We had a continuous improvement team. So every time we had an outage, there were 3 folks whose job it was to respond to the aftermath of that outage and make sure it never happened again. Depending on the outage, right, it would have to be a severity 1, but say something like the website went down and it was because it didn't fail over properly. It would be about re-architecture, making sure we have HA or proper release management. It could be getting more money for additional capacity in certain areas, things like that. And they would track that and make sure that everything was closed out. And on the monitoring side, what they would do is something really simple. It was, we'd improve the monitoring to catch whatever root cause it was that we did not catch ahead of time before. So it was pretty straightforward and pragmatic, but it really worked. It was great. We had 186,000 servers at the time, so we had to automate everything or it wouldn't have worked at all. And we didn't have the cloud this is back in 2005, so we didn't have the
The
cloud.
old days.
Yeah.
Neat, you're sounding like an SRE a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, a big part of that movement, and we have no Microsoft, is like When something goes down, is there an outcome? Do we say, what outage? Do we kind of pretend like nothing happened? Do we go to punish the bad people that caused this issue? Or do we say, wow, we're trying to reconstruct a timeline and we have no idea what happened or where? Let's talk about improving our monitoring, for example. When something goes bad, does it eventually get fixed? That's a big metric for how healthy an organization is.
And that's a healthy response. And I think most people experience a little bit of all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. And that's a mindset you have to go through. Just learn from your mistakes and you will make less mistakes.
I might
New and
just
interesting.
add one more metric to think about. One that I ran into while I was at Pfizer doing mobile banking, and I had never thought of before. You know, since we're in Agile, we're doing PI, so we're doing like quarterly planning type things, and you've got a lot of information coming in. People process it, and then people go and sell ideas, and they may not be around for 6 months, right? So the person who's saying, hey, I've got this great feature, and we need to put it in production, it's going to cost this much, and it's going to make this much, leaves in 6 months. Meanwhile, their ROI calculations were like 5-year projections. So how many times, and I'll guess very few people have this, how many times do you measure the success of the feature over that 5 years and find out if you actually made your ROI or not? And I've actually seen this happen in one company, and it was brilliant. I mean, we were measuring success of feature deployments within like 6 months, and we could tell the very same person who just sold us that idea, who's now selling us the next one, that he was off by 20%. So let's cut that next feature down by a bit. It's very useful.
ROI.
Yeah, it's hard to measure, but it actually, if you bake it into monitoring somehow, if you actually look at those calculations and make that part of your monitoring, it's very useful. And you can start to prove value to your managers, and that helps kind of boost the whole technology group.
So let me do a time check. JD, how much time do we have? And I was going to send out the questions. We have negative 1 minute, right? How much time do we really have? We'll go a little less than that, somewhere between -1 and a half hour. Questions, comments, thoughts for our esteemed panelists? Any disagreements? You can say, oh, this is all crap, I disagree. Yes.
How close are your users?
Question is, how close are your users to your code? Because one of the things that we haven't touched on, because kind of the larger title of this is trying to make sure that your users have success. So putting users near the code is really making sure that a user's interaction with the site ends in some business and then some technical change that allows the user to be that much more successful. So when we say, how close are your users to the code, what does that mean?
Yeah, so speaking for our org, furthest from, and that's something that we're trying to correct. And I mentioned earlier, we're starting to begin this kind of discussion around cloud strategy, but outside of that, regardless of whether it's on-prem or cloud, it's a discussion about how do we become more reactive and receptive to our customer needs. Today, we're a series of monolithic apps, and I wasn't kidding when I made the comment that some of our stuff is old enough to vote. We want to provide that better experience, and we've had a very seismic shift in thinking amongst our execs, which has been much needed and very exciting. We're not close to it. I mean, it's going to be a multi-year journey, but I'm very comfortable that we'll finally start to ask the right questions to move that direction. It's just going to take time.
And incremental rollouts of features or changes, different ways to do that too. Like, and everybody uses Netflix as an example. And it's a good example. Like, they roll out a new feature change, very subtle sometimes, to a specific area, let's say in the US, some part of the US, and they wait for feedback, and then they'll determine based on the feedback whether that feature is promoted to a wider space or whether they only promote it to certain areas. And I think I've seen that at Nike, I've seen that at other companies I work for. So it's just, it's really making sure that information gets back to the devs who are able to make those changes and giving them ownership to actually apply those changes.
I would add that while I have some challenges on my website side, I did, and this is not a plug, but I did implement RayGun on my iOS apps. And when a user hits a crash, those crashes then get all centralized into one location. They get then bucketed automatically. So I was discovering that I have this iOS app that doesn't work behind an authenticated proxy. I had absolutely no idea like that anyone would use it behind a proxy. I had no idea that authenticated proxy still existed. And then I started getting all of these things that were like individual automated bug reports from crashes in my app. They got bucketed, and then RayGun says, 7 people in the last hour have had this issue, and then over the last X number of months, 500 people are now hitting this regularly, and it made me realize that it was a feature gap. So in that sense, I would get a thing that shows, here's the call stack, here's the line number, where things are crashing. So it feels to me like my users can see the code, because it's almost like I got this gift in the form of a bug report from a person who hit that line.
Yeah.
And then you don't see the code, it's all automatic because RayGun, but it feels like, wow, hey, you have a bug, it's this thing and a feature, and it sucks. Go fix that line of code.
And it's impacting this number of people. It's out of 10,000 bucks, it aggregates.
It's the time windowing bucketing and the concept of a bucket. Like, here is a class of error that happens, bucketed by country, by feature, by crash, and then you get the this class of error has been increasing in the last X months. It's really sophisticated, almost like a human wrote it.
Yeah, and to add, I mean, really to your question almost exactly, it's like you have this technology, it's great, it does exactly what you want, and then you've got potentially a management or a process that doesn't prioritize that fix for 6 months out. And if that's costing your customers, maybe they're walking away, maybe they're not buying the product, whatever it is, that's really the key. So having a management decision to say, hey, when that stuff pops up, we take priority. That's the first thing.
So as the manager, the first thing I did was make it not crash when they hit that I don't support that. So now I can put up an apologetic and sheepish message box that says, I'm so sorry. I can detect that you have a authenticated proxy. We're working on it actively. And I could push that out in a day. And that made them feel like, and all of my authenticated proxy complaints, customer support complaints went out because I pushed out this is an issue. So,
the data drives your urgency, and you're able to take that and turn that into a better experience.
Right. It's still only 1.2% of my customers, so it's enough to be annoying, but at least now they don't crash.
So I'm hearing a lot of interesting and great things, but one question I have for the panel is that I'm wondering, can lean principles be applied to IT? And if they can they be applied to all the things we've been talking about? The DevOps, to shift left, to continuous improvement, doing things incrementally, and if it can, how can that happen?
The question is,
Does it make sense?
can lean principles be applied to all of the things we've been discussing?
So I believe they absolutely can. And looking at how we've tried to implement lean, we have some standards that we're trying to adhere to, but the core of it is transparency, communicate up, communicate inside, communicate down, and experiments to reach the ultimate truth. For me, we talk Agile, we talk Safe, we talk DevOps. They're all slightly different tools in the same box. And I think if you pick and choose the pieces of lean principles that make a lot of sense for your organization, you can go all in on it and reap benefit. And you can tie it with everything we're talking about here. It's ultimately going to be how it tailors to serve you best. What we've had an internal struggle is we've tried to force everything into the lean box. And it's kind of like idle 2 versus idle 3. Idle 2 was thou shalt do X. And idle 3 was, maybe not. Maybe, take what you need. And that's how, at least for me, from my own experience, I look at lean within IT saying, here are some components that I can take and it will add to the experience. But it doesn't have to be that.
I thought I saw a question in the back here. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the monitoring topic, I'm curious how you guys are handling making sure you're monitoring the right stuff. Because what I found historically is, whether it's, a development team or the infrastructure team, we tend to leave the decisions around monitoring to the IT type of people. And I'm an IT person, so don't anybody get offended by this. And we don't include business in the conversation, or customer in the conversation, or we include one small portion of business in the conversation. And, I think you guys were talking earlier about the amount of data we're collecting, the amount of things we can monitor. But if it's not actionable, if it's not something that adds to revenue, if it doesn't enhance customer experience, why bother, right? Uptime, that's great if your servers up, but if it's running slow or it's affecting customer experience, That's the problem, not, oh, the server's, I've got a server down here, but my customer experience is fine and I'm still transacting.
Yeah,
Big deal,
well,
we'll get to it on
to
Monday. So how are
Niamh's
you guys
point-
having those discussions?
Denise' point about starting with the end in mind
Yeah.
is important, and to this young lady's point about the concept of the customer, like how close is the customer to your code? I went and just lit up monitoring for all my stuff just because I could. But I never thought about the customer, I never put myself in there in any empathy in my decisions, nor did I put any business hat on.
Yeah, sorry.
So I was just gonna say, I think you, if you can at all, you should absolutely involve the folks who are designing that application or, are the ones who are interacting with the business. What I used to also do is go out and also go back to the vendors sometimes and ask them what their best practices were and fold that in as well. So if I had, when we were deploying new services from Microsoft, for example, I would get input from those teams, but then I go back and triangulate with the vendor and just say, hey, are there other things that you recommend us monitoring as well in addition to this? But not like 5,000 things. I want the 10 things that I should monitor, right?
Yeah, I would just go back to the basic question, like your business asks you to do something on their behalf. And if you need to be upfront and ask them, what do they care about? I mean, there's kind of an MVP argument, like what do you care about and how do you want to measure that? And based on that, then you can build your monitoring around it.
So you guys having those conversations, like
Yeah.
you're getting the right level of input, because I find it, I'm dealing with the right level of engagement too. That
You have to do a lot of the translation.
what's important to the marketing manager may not be the same thing that's.
So I've had challenges with like retail companies where they'll say, speed, the number one most important thing is speed. And I'll say, hey, about that 2 megabyte picture of a boot, you can't have sub 1 second and a 2 megabyte picture of a boot. And then you can have all kinds of conversations about, well, I can detect that they're on mobile and then do progressive rendering where I give them a squishy version of that. Like that's a really, how you get like a JPEG that's like low res and then it comes in later. Well, how many people are overseas? And you can have those things. You can attach a $sign to, okay, well, how much do you really care about that? That you want super fast and super high res. Good, fast, or cheap, pick 2.
Yes. So there's a great book out there called Measure What Matters by Brewer, I think it is. And the other one was called Practical Monitoring by Edelman, I think. But at Microsoft, we went through this evolution where we picked all these numbers, we used them as clubs, we forced people to harp on like throwdown charts. Why does that matter? It's a local definition of success and it sucks for the globe. So we said, well, what we're really drowning in right now is technical debt. So we came up with the BTE ratio. That's the bugs to engineers ratio. And we experimented with it. And we said, if it's more than 5, we're pretty sure this team's drowning in technical debt. Sometimes there's a valid reason for
Slow
that.
down and explain that ratio.
So it's you take the number of engineers on a team
Okay,
and the
5,
number of bugs in your backlog.
2,000.
Okay, I can't do the math now. It's way too
No, it's like 500 bucks per person.
But if the ratio is 5 or above, we're pretty sure we're struggling.
Then everyone is struggling. No
We
scenario.
have to tune that. Now, there's times starting out where you're going to be way above that, right? But for a stable team that's well along, 5 seem to be the
5
number.
bugs per dev.
But we would use this as a gateway to a conversation. It wasn't like a hard cap.
Oh my god.
Now in SRE, you're talking about an air budget. So those are both customer-facing metrics that matter. You have a lot of bugs, you got a poor performing application. It's kind of a partial answer to your question, Brian, but it was an evolutionary thing.
So in our space, the answer is we weren't talking business. And we were monitoring a whole bunch of stuff that we thought that mattered, and honestly, maybe half of it did. With this kind of reboot, the real conversation, kicking dirt over the line where IT is really becoming part of the business, those conversations are now starting to happen. And the journey is going to be kind of interesting, painful, and fun to watch. But I think we're finally going to start doing what we should be doing, which is we can collect everything, but let's make sure we're focusing on the things that actually move the needle.
So we got a question here, and does anyone on this side have a question? Because this side's super chatty. No? All right, then this will be our last question.
So since speed and earlier, more intelligence being brought into monitoring to help dig through as customers are monitoring more and more, if they don't know what to look at. I mean, a reflex I see for customers that just want to turn on everything. There's a trade-off there where you might have intelligence that is helping you sort through that data in the functions that matter, but if 20 minutes after a server goes down, you get an alert that says, hey, we figured out a server went down, That doesn't work. So how do you guys think about balancing speed to get events versus time to insight from lots of complex data?
So noise, lots and lots of noisy alerts.
Yeah.
A million chihuahuas.
Until you get through the noise, then it slows down your speed of getting very specific.
So this should probably be a part of your blameless postmortem process, is saying what alert could have caught this earlier, right? And that way, I mean, having a million alerts is almost worse than having none. I would highly recommend scaling back and just look at your last 60 days and the outages and just the alerts that would have prevented those outages, because odds are you're going to hit them again. That might help cut down the noise problem.
Well, if you take your example, right, about a server going down, that might not matter. The server team might care about that, right?
Sure.
So I think in terms of reacting to the server going down, it probably doesn't matter that it took you 20 minutes to do it, right? So I think it's about distinguishing between the right KPIs on the front end and what really represents an actual outage, as opposed to a server went down, but it was in a cluster because the architecture of property, and so it doesn't actually matter. And
As opposed to the server went down.
right, as opposed to these server going down, and then correlating that to, okay, maybe I had less throughput and therefore I sold less stuff during that time period when that server was down. So it's not, it's about taking that business KPI about I'm selling stuff. Like I worked a lot with Verizon Wireless, and I liked it a lot because they have one metric that's really important, and it's average revenue per user. And for a long time, they were selling data throughput, right? So the more data they could push through the network, the more they could build you, their customer, right? And from that perspective, they did a lot of network optimization around, okay, so I'm upgrading backhaul on a cell phone tower. That now means I can, support you streaming Netflix in like the backlands of Montana, but I can also bill you for that service. And the other thing they did was they optimized image and video transport so that they could compress it by half, so they could have more video traffic going through their network, because that was driving 80% of what they were seeing. So things like that, and tying those longer term investments back to performance and throughput.
So what you described is the situation that we've had. And we've outsourced our event management team. So there is a knock somewhere that is watching every 5 minutes. And we have had systems, or actually we've had servers go down where we were notified by the customers before they got the alert. So when we change the thresholds and they start getting flooded with alerts, how do we cut through the chaff and focus on the things that matter? I don't have a good answer for that, at least for us, but it is absolutely a pain that when you said it, I'm like, yeah, know that one. We've got to find the balance. We've got to find the balance to get the useful alerts and make sure the thresholds are right. And it may always be an oscillator.
Yeah, that's a good point. It changes a lot. You like spend an entire quarter getting a certain amount of information set up and the dashboard all ready for the customer, and they absorb it. And then 2 months later, they say, wow, this isn't actually getting us the thing we want. So, another thing, and money's no object, right? But, gathering all that information and then having a flexible way to isolate the information you need and be able to respond to that almost as a product, like be able to just adjust that dashboard, adjust the things you're trying to alert on within a very short couple sprint cycles or something. Really important.
Cool. I want to say thank you very much to Niamh, Brian, Kathy, Dave, and John for their time today, and for RayGun and Microsoft for hosting us here. Hopefully this did not waste your time. I felt like it was pretty decent amount of time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to all of you for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for
Appreciate
everybody.